welcome back to the deep dive. Okay, I want to start today by asking you to do something that might be a little uncomfortable. I want you to just close your eyes for a second and summon a specific memory.
Oh boy.
No, stick with me. When I say the words learning a second language, and let's get specific, English or Spanish, what is the very first image that flashes into your brain?
That is a very loaded request to start with. You're going to trigger some, classroom PTSD in people.
I know, but it's part of the point. Do you see a classroom? Is it, dusty? Does it smell like chalk and old floor wax? Is there a teacher standing on a blackboard making you repeat, "the cat is on the table," over and over and over again until the words just lose all meaning?
The classic drill and kill method. I can feel it.
Exactly. Or, okay, let's flip the script completely. Do you maybe picture yourself in a dark room at 2 in the morning, headset on, screaming at a teammate in a video game lobby because you desperately need them to cover your flank, and the only way to get through to them is to shout in, broken Spanish?
It's a pretty vivid contrast. And honestly, your answer to that question essentially timestamps you. It's like carbon dating for your generation.
That is exactly what we are unpacking today. We've got this fascinating stack of research to get through, and it's all centered around an article called Inglés Español a través de generaciones from the platform Habla.
Right.
And the core thesis here is something that I think we often overlook, or maybe we just take it for granted. We tend to look at language learning as this very static academic thing. You memorize the vocabulary, you learn the grammar rules.
You take the test.
You take the test, you forget it all 2 weeks later.
Right, we treat it like it's algebra or something, just another subject.
Precisely. But this research argues that learning a language is, it's never just about the words. It is a direct reflection of the world the learner is living in. It's about history, it's about technology, it's about wars, and it's definitely about money.
All about the context. And if you look at the trajectory we're going to cover today, from the silent generation born in the late 20s all the way up to Generation Alpha, the kids being born right now, you aren't just seeing changes in how they learn.
No.
We're not just talking about the shift from, a heavy textbook to a TikTok algorithm. You are seeing a fundamental shift in why humans even bother to communicate across these lines.
The why. That's the mission for this deep dive. We are tracing the evolution of language from what the source calls an elite luxury all the way to a digital necessity.
That's a huge jump.
It is.
Yeah.
And we're focusing specifically on the dynamic between English and Spanish because that relationship has gone from, virtually non-existent to completely and totally entangled in the last 100 years.
It's a wild ride. We're going to see how we went from a world where language was basically a gatekeeper, something used to keep people out, to a world where language is the price of admission just to exist in the digital space.
And we should definitely mention all these insights are drawn from the analysis provided by Habla and their deep look at these generational trends. They've really mapped out the sociology of this whole thing, which is what makes it so interesting to me. It's not just linguistics.
No, it's more like anthropology. It's the study of human behavior through this lens.
Yes, exactly. So, shall we fire up the time machine?
Let's do it. Where are we starting?
Okay, we are going way, way back. Part 1. We're calling this the era of exclusivity. We are talking about the silent generation. These are folks born roughly between, say, 1928 and 1945.
So the pre-digital world, the pre-almost everything world.
Very pre-digital. We are talking about growing up during the Great Depression and then World War II. Now, help us set the scene here, because I think for a lot of us, especially younger listeners, it is genuinely hard to conceive of how large the world felt back then.
It was massive.
Yeah.
And even a word like disconnected doesn't quite do it justice.
Yeah.
You have to remember, for the silent generation, distance was a physical, expensive, time-consuming barrier.
Right.
You didn't just hop on a cheap flight to Barcelona for the weekend. Commercial air travel, as we know, it didn't exist for the masses. It was a luxury for the ultra-rich. If you wanted to get from New York to London, you were taking a ship.
A ship for days.
For days, and it cost a fortune. The world was physically separate in a way we just can't really imagine now.
And what about communication? How did you talk to someone in another country?
Well, you could send a telegram, which was expensive, and you paid by the word. Or, if you were really wealthy, you could place a long-distance phone call. And even then, you had to go through an operator. The connection would be filled with static. It was a whole event just to say hello.
Wow. Okay, so in that context, the source material describes learning a foreign language as a luxury. And I want to push back on that word just a little bit, or at least dig into it. Luxury implies it's something nice to have, like a a silk scarf. But was it luxury or was it just irrelevant for most people?
That's a great distinction to make. I think it was a luxury, precisely because it was a marker of class. Let's look at Hispanic countries, or say Europe during this time. If you were an average person, a farmer, a factory worker, a shopkeeper, learning English wasn't even on your radar.
Why would it be?
Exactly. Why would it be? You were never going to meet an English speaker. You were never going to read an English book or newspaper. It had zero, and I mean zero, utility in your daily struggle just to survive.
So who was learning it? Who were these people?
The elite, the absolute top of the pyramid. Diplomats, high-level academics at the best universities, the old money aristocracy. If you spoke English in Madrid or Buenos Aires in 1940, you were signaling something very, very specific to the world.
What were you signaling?
You were saying, I have the money to travel internationally, I have the education to read foreign scientific journals, I am part of the international club that runs the world.
So it was a velvet rope. It was a way to keep people out.
It was the ultimate velvet rope. It was a status symbol, pure and simple. Yes, it was a key to international opportunity. But those opportunities were restricted to the top 1% of society. It wasn't a tool for daily life. It was a badge of honor.
Okay, so that's the view from the Spanish-speaking world. What about the flip side? What about in Anglophone countries like the US or the UK during this silent generation era? How was Spanish viewed?
This is where it gets really, really stark compared to today. The source describes it as purely an academic interest. And I want to put a lot of emphasis on the word academic.
Meaning it lived in libraries, not on the street. It was theoretical.
Completely. If you were an American in 1940 and you were studying Spanish, you weren't doing it so you could talk to your neighbors or order food at a local restaurant.
Yeah.
You were doing it because you wanted to read Don Quixote in the original text. Or maybe you were a historian studying the Spanish Empire. It was intellectual. It was abstract. It had no perceived practical application in your day-to-day life.
But wait, I mean, there were Latino communities in the US back then. It's not like they just appeared out of nowhere.
They existed, absolutely. But the demographic factor, the sheer scale of it, wasn't there yet in the way it is now. And crucially, the cultural segregation was so much higher. The source makes a point to note that Latino immigration in Anglophone regions was not yet significant enough to force the dominant culture to engage with the language.
It was ignorable.
For the majority culture, yes. It was something that happened over there in that neighborhood. It wasn't part of the mainstream consciousness.
So if I'm just a regular guy in, say, Ohio in 1945, Spanish is basically as relevant to my daily life as, I don't know, ancient Latin.
That's a perfect analogy. For all practical purposes of your daily routine, it might as well have been a dead language. It was something you studied to be cultured, not to be functional.
That is just wild to think about, how we went from language as an ornament to where we are now.
A very expensive ornament.
Right. But we have to go through the messy middle first, so let's move the clock forward a bit. War ends, the soldiers come home, the economy starts to shift, the baby boom begins. We're entering part 2, the awakening.
The baby boomers, born roughly 1946 to 1964.
The source calls this the awakening. That sounds a little bit dramatic, doesn't it? Like a spiritual revival or something?
It does, but you know, in terms of global connectivity, it kind of fits. This is the period when the intense isolation of the silent generation really starts to crack. The world starts shrinking for the first time for a lot of people.
What are the main drivers here? What breaks the seal?
Two big engines, according to the source: the multinational corporation and the jet plane.
Okay, let's unpack the corporate side first. This is the era of the company man, right? The man in the gray flannel suit.
That's it, exactly. Post-war, the U.S. economy is just exploding, and British and American companies go into this massive expansion mode. They're setting up operations in Latin America, in Europe, just everywhere. We're talking about Ford, IBM, Coca-Cola planting their flags all over the globe.
So suddenly, if you are a young professional in Mexico City or Santiago, English isn't just for diplomats and aristocrats anymore.
No.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to be a manager at the new Ford plant or an accountant at the new IBM office, you need English. It shifts from being a pure status symbol to being a career accelerator.
It's still elite, but the circle is widening.
Right. The circle is widening to include this new, burgeoning professional middle class. It's becoming a tool for upward mobility.
And the education system, I'm assuming it tried to catch up with this new demand.
It tried. And this is where we really need to talk about how they learned, because the source notes that while schools started including English in their curriculums, the quality was variable.
Variable is a very polite academic way of saying it was mostly terrible, isn't it?
It was painful. We have to look at the pedagogy of the time. This was the absolute golden age of what was called the audiolingual method.
The what? I've never heard of that.
The audiolingual method is based on behaviorist psychology. The core idea was that language is just a set of habits. So if you just drill the students relentlessly, repeat after me, eventually the pattern sticks in their brain.
Listen and repeat. Listen and repeat. I'm having flashbacks to my own French classes.
Exactly. It was hours and hours of conjugating verbs on a chalkboard. I am, you are, he is, she is. It was pure brute force rote memorization.
So what was the problem with it? I mean, it sounds logical in a way.
The problem, as the source points out, and as anyone who went through it can tell you, is that it completely lacked context. You could produce a grammatically perfect sentence, but you couldn't actually have a real conversation. You didn't know why you were saying it or how to respond if someone said something unexpected.
It was language as math. You're just solving an equation.
Yes, you were solving for X, you weren't communicating a thought or an emotion, and the result was that you had a whole generation of boomers who took Spanish for 4 years in high school but can't say anything other than ¿Dónde está la biblioteca?
Where is the library? I feel personally attacked. I think that method hung around a lot longer than just the boomers.
Oh, it definitely did. Its ghost still haunts classrooms today.
Okay, but let's look at the other driver you mentioned for this awakening. Tourism.
Right, the jet age. This is a huge deal. Suddenly, it's not just the super rich who can fly. A middle-class family from Chicago can save up and take a vacation to Mexico. Acapulco becomes this massive destination for Americans.
And on the other side,
Spain, under Franco, opens up its coasts to northern Europeans looking for sun. The Costa del Sol is born. So you had this explosion of contact between ordinary people who had never interacted before.
so Spanish starts to rise in the US and Canada. The visibility increases.
It becomes visible. That's the key word. You have the increasing visibility of Latino communities at home, plus this new tourism aspect. It's not just academic anymore. You might actually see Spanish on a sign or hear it on a vacation. But, and this is a big but, the source highlights a critical limitation here. While the awareness grew, the actual access to learning was still really clunky.
This is the toolbox concept from the article.
Right. The source lists some specific resources that emerged or became relevant during this time. Things like the English to Mexican Spanish translator manuals, these little pocket books, or formal institutions like UNAM Mexico and the Instituto Cervantes.
But these weren't apps on a phone. There's no Duolingo.
No, not even close.
Yeah.
You have to think about the friction involved. If a boomer in the 1970s wanted to learn Spanish, they had to physically get in their car and drive to a library. They had to buy a heavy, expensive dictionary. The source mentions the Diccionario del Español de Mexico, for example.
Or sign up for a night class.
Exactly. Sign up for a night class at a community college that meets every Tuesday and Thursday. You had to be incredibly intentional about it.
You had to really, really want it. It wasn't something you could just do passively.
Not at all. It wasn't something you could do while waiting for the bus or making dinner. So the big takeaway for the boomers is that language shifted from being a luxury to being an advantage. It was an asset. If you had it, you were definitely ahead of the pack. But you could still go your whole life without it and be totally, completely fine.
Okay, so the world is getting smaller, the cracks are showing in the old walls, and then the 80s hit. And the world starts getting a lot faster. This brings us to the era of Generation X. We're talking born roughly 1965 to 1980.
The latchkey generation.
Yeah.
My generation.
And this feels like the real turning point. This is where language seems to stop being a nice to have and really becomes a must have in certain fields.
That is the perfect distinction. We move from asset to standard. It's no longer about getting ahead, it's about not falling behind.
Let's talk about the business context for Gen X. This is the era of aggressive globalization. Wall Street is booming. The idea of the global supply chain really takes hold.
Exactly. Everything is interconnected now in a way it wasn't before. If you are in the business world in the 80s and 90s, whether you are in finance, international trade, technology English stops being an option. It becomes a mandate.
The source calls it a professional standard. Not a skill, a standard like knowing how to type.
Yes. Think about the multinational corporations now. They aren't just setting up separate siloed plants anymore. They are integrating their global systems.
Yeah.
If you are a mid-level manager in Madrid, you are on conference calls with New York and Tokyo. You aren't using a translator for that call.
You are the translator.
You are. And all the documentation, the memos, the early email systems, it's all in English. It's the default operating language of global business.
So if you didn't speak English, there was a ceiling, a career ceiling.
A hard glass ceiling. You couldn't advance past a certain level. You were locked out of the global economy. It was no longer a badge of culture or a nice little advantage. It was a prerequisite for serious employment in many white-collar fields.
And what about Spanish in the US during this time? Because my memory as a Gen Xer is that Spanish stopped being invisible. It became part of the soundscape.
It absolutely surged. And this is driven purely by demographics. The Latino population in the United States grew massively during this period. Spanish became omnipresent in major cities like Los Angeles, Miami, New York, Chicago.
Right, you started seeing bilingual packaging in grocery stores, you started flipping through the TV channels and seeing Univision or Telemundo.
Exactly. It was no longer something you only encountered on vacation. It was part of daily American life for a growing number of people.
And did the schools finally catch up?
They got better than they were for the boomers. The source notes that high schools began offering Spanish much more consistently. For a Gen X kid in the US, taking Spanish became the default foreign language option. French and German started to fade away in terms of popularity because the practical utility of Spanish was becoming incredibly obvious.
But I want to touch on the vibe of this era.
Yeah.
Because when you describe it, it feels very transactional, very utilitarian.
It was. This is the greed is good era, right? The Reagan and Thatcher years. Everything was being commodified, and language became a commodity. It was a skill to be traded on the open market.
It's an entry on your resume.
I speak Spanish, therefore I am worth $5,000 more a year to this construction firm in Arizona. Or, I speak English so I can get a job at the international bank instead of the local one.
So it wasn't about connection or understanding another culture, it was about survival in the marketplace.
Precisely. For the most part, you learned it because you had to. It was a tool in your belt right next to your proficiency in Microsoft Excel or Lotus 123.
Okay, so we've commodified language, we've put a price tag on it. Now let's disrupt the whole system. Part 4, the bridge generation, the millennials, born 1981 to 1996.
Generation that remembers the world without the internet but came of age right alongside it, the dial-up modem generation.
The source makes a really, really interesting point here. It suggests that for millennials, the how of learning changes dramatically, but the why of learning changes even more.
It's the critical shift from production to consumption.
Explain what you mean by that.
Well, think about the previous generations we've discussed. For the most part, you learned a language to produce something for work, to write a report, to make a sales call, to close a deal.
Right, it's an output.
It's an output. But for millennials, especially Spanish speakers who are learning English, the primary driver shifted to consuming content.
The cool factor, the entertainment value.
It was huge. This is the first generation where mass media becomes the primary teacher and accelerates the learning process. We're talking music, cinema, the early internet, and especially video games.
I have a friend who swears up and down he learned English entirely from playing The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time on his Nintendo 64.
And he's not alone.
No.
I hear that story all the time. Think about it. If you're a kid in Mexico in 1998 and you want to play the latest and greatest role-playing game, it's probably only available in English.
Or you want to understand what the Spice Girls or Britney Spears are actually singing about?
Or you want to watch the new episode of Friends or The X-Files before it gets dubbed into Spanish 6 months later. You had to learn English to be part of the global cultural conversation.
So the motivation isn't, my boss told me to, it's, I want to know what happens next in this story.
Desire versus obligation. That is a massively powerful pedagogical shift. When you learn because you want the information that is encoded in the language, your brain just absorbs it differently. It's not rote memorization anymore. It's active code breaking. You're solving a puzzle you care about.
That's a great way to put it. And what about on the other side? Spanish in the US for millennials. The source calls it economic leverage. That sounds a step up from just a standard.
Yes. Because by the time millennials are entering the workforce, say the mid-2000s, the Latino population in the US has reached a demographic and economic tipping point. Spanish isn't just for international business anymore. It's for domestic business. It's for healthcare. It's for law enforcement. It's for retail.
It's local. It's about serving your own community.
Exactly. If you are a nurse in California or Texas or Florida, speaking Spanish isn't just a nice bonus on your resume. It is a daily operational necessity. You literally cannot do your job effectively and serve all your patients without it.
And what about culturally? I feel like for millennials, this is when the foreignness of Spanish really starts to evaporate in the US.
Completely. This is the era of the Latin music crossover. Ricky Martin's Livin' La Vida Loca, Shakira, Jennifer Lopez, Enrique Iglesias. For a millennial growing up, Spanish wasn't some exotic academic thing. It was on MTV's TRL. It was in the biggest movies. It was part of the American pop culture fabric.
So the big analysis here is really the move from learning in a classroom to learning by living, whether that's living online or living in a more diverse neighborhood.
Yes. It's the profound realization that pop culture teaches language faster and more effectively than textbooks ever could, because it adds emotion and desire to the mix. You remember the lyrics to a song you love far better than a random vocabulary list.
Which sets the stage perfectly for the true natives, the ones who have never known a world without this constant stream of culture. Part 5. The digital natives. Generation Z, born roughly 1997 to 2012.
The first generation that has never, ever breathed air that didn't have Wi-Fi in it.
And the source makes a really provocative statement here, one that I think is brilliant. It says that for Gen Z, English is like an operating system.
It's such a perfect metaphor. Think about the basic architecture of the internet. The coding languages that build it, Python, HTML, Java, they are all based on English vocabulary. The URL structures, the QWERTY keyboards, the dominant platforms, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Twitter, they all started in English and were designed with English speakers in mind first.
So the internet itself is English structurally. It's baked into the code.
At its deepest core, yes.
Yeah.
So for a Gen Z kid growing up in a non-English speaking country, English isn't really a subject they go to school for in the same way. It is the environment they log into every single day.
So the learning just happens naturally, passively.
It's osmosis. That's the best word for it. A Gen Z kid in Argentina isn't sitting down with a stack of flashcards to learn English vocabulary. They're logging onto a Roblox server. They're jumping on a Discord channel to coordinate a raid in a video game with kids from 5 different countries. They are watching a YouTuber in London unbox the latest gadget.
They are acquiring the language, not learning it.
That is the key linguistic distinction: acquisition versus learning. Learning is a conscious process. It's study. Acquisition is subconscious. It happens when you are so focused on the message, on the goal, that you don't even notice the medium. Gen Z acquires English because they are participating in a global conversation, and English is the lingua franca of that conversation.
It's not studying, it's living your life online.
And because of that, their English is totally different from the textbook English of previous generations. It's full of slang. It's internet English. It's loaded with means and in-jokes. It's fast, it's colloquial, and it's constantly evolving.
Now, let's flip it and talk about the Spanish boom for Gen Z, because the source highlights this massive global rise in the popularity of Spanish.
It's absolutely huge.
Yeah.
And again, look at the drivers. It's not about reading Cervantes. It's about TikTok.
TikTok is the teacher now.
In a very real way, yes. You have these 15-second clips of constant cultural exchange. You have an artist like Bad Bunny being the most streamed artist in the entire world for years in a row, and he's singing entirely in Spanish. You have reggaeton dominating global music charts.
It feels like the barriers are just gone. They've dissolved.
They have. The algorithms don't care about borders. A kid in Ohio gets served a viral dance trend that started in Colombia. A kid in Seoul watches a makeup tutorial from a Latina creator in Miami. The cultural mixing is instantaneous and frictionless.
And there is a stat here from the source that really blew my mind. It says that in the US, Gen Z is identified as the most bilingual generation in history.
That is a profound shift. Think back to the silent generation for a second. If you were an immigrant kid in 1940, the pressure was immense to assimilate. Speak English only. You were often forced to lose your heritage language to fit in.
And now, for Gen Z.
Now, being bilingual is a flex. It's cool.
Yeah.
It's an asset. Gen Z embraces that duality. They code switch effortlessly, moving between English and Spanish in the same sentence, sometimes in the same breath. It's not something to hide anymore. It's a core part of their identity, their online brand.
So are we actually seeing the death of the language barrier? Is that what this is leading to?
In many ways, I think so. For Gen Z, language learning is no longer this conscious, laborious effort. It's a side effect of their digital existence. They pick it up because they have to, in order to consume the content they love and connect with the communities they care about.
Which leads us to the youngest group, the ones who are still in diapers or elementary school right now. Generation Alpha, born from 2013 to the present.
The iPad kids.
Yeah.
The children of the algorithm.
The source uses a fascinating word to describe their learning. It calls it Ambient.
Ambient. It's a great word. It means it's just there, it's in the background all the time, like the hum of the air conditioning. You don't even notice it.
They learn via apps, videos, and games from toddlerhood.
I see this with my own nieces and nephews. They are 3 or 4 years old. They're on a tablet with YouTube Kids. The algorithm serves them a video of a nursery rhyme in English, then one in Spanish. Maybe the next one is a cartoon with a mix of both.
And they don't blank. They don't get confused.
They don't even realize they're switching languages. They don't have the concept of a foreign language yet. To them, it's all just communication. It's all just interesting content. The distinction is meaningless.
The source says English is part of the environment, not just a school subject.
That's the ultimate shift, isn't it? For the silent generation, language was a distant object you had to travel halfway across the world to find. For Gen Alpha, it is the wallpaper of their lives. It surrounds them constantly from birth.
And Spanish is cited here as the second most spoken language in the world in terms of native speakers, and its presence is just growing.
And its presence in their entertainment is massive. Dora the Explorer was just the start. Now, bilingual content is the standard, not the exception, for a lot of early education media. So Gen Alpha is growing up in a world that is fundamentally, casually, effortlessly multilingual.
So let's just quickly recap this incredible arc before we get to the final piece of the puzzle. We went from luxury
To advantage,
and necessity.
yeah, now to environment.
It's just the water they swim in.
And they don't even know they're wet.
I want to pivot here for our last section. We've been pulling all these insights from the Habla platform, and I think we need to talk about what Habla actually is, because it serves as a really interesting case study of this modern era we just described.
It really does. The platform itself is a mirror of the trends we've been discussing this whole time.
The source describes Habla not just as a tool or a piece of software, but as a global community gathering. And I feel like that distinction, community versus tool, is exactly where we've landed.
It's almost the counter trend, in a way.
Yeah.
We have all this amazing technology. We have Duolingo with its gamification and its slightly threatening owl. We have Google Translate in our pocket. We have AI that can write entire essays for us. But what is Habla focused on?
The human element. The source mentions a 5-year online meeting history. They have these regular meetings on Monday, Wednesday, and Sunday. And the stated goal is twofold: language exchange and making friends from around the world.
Making friends. Not achieving fluency or passing a test. Making friends, that's the human core of it.
It feels like a direct rebellion against the purely transactional nature of the Gen X era we talked about.
It absolutely is. Gen X learned the language to make money. Millennials and Gen Z are using technology to bridge physical gaps. But the end goal is often emotional connection. They want to know the person on the other side of that screen. They want to understand their jokes, their culture, their life.
It's democratizing that elite knowledge we talked about with the silent generation. Back then, you needed a diplomat salary and a steamship ticket to have a global community gathering.
Exactly. You had to be a member of the club. Now, you just need an internet connection.
Yeah.
And the link to the Sunday Zoom meeting. The barriers of cost, class, and geography have been completely obliterated.
The source also lists other modern resources that fit into this new landscape, things like BBC Learning Spanish, My Spanish Class, and the big online course platforms like Coursera and edX.
And those platforms represent the final dismantling of the ivory tower. This knowledge used to be locked away in university libraries, accessible only to a few. Now it's free or very cheap, and it's accessible to literally anyone on the planet with curiosity and a Wi-Fi signal.
So we've traced this entire century-long arc. It's really an incredible story when you lay it all out.
It's a remarkable journey of globalization and technology.
Phase 1, the silent generation. Language as a luxury and a gateway.
Phase 2, the boomers in Gen X. Language as a professional advantage, and then a professional standard. The tool of the globalized trade.
And finally, Phase 3, the millennials, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha. Language as a digital necessity and a lived environment. The basic requirement for participation in the modern world. The why has changed so fundamentally. We went from a fragmented world where language was used to keep people out to a hyper-connected world where language is the key that lets you in.
The source's conclusion really hits home on this point. It says that in a globalized and digital world, what was once a rare luxury is now a basic requirement. You cannot fully participate in modern life without engaging with this global linguistic mix. You can't just opt out anymore.
That is a very powerful place to land. But I want to leave you, our listener, with one final thought. A little bit of a provocation to chew on. because there was one tiny detail in the source metadata that we haven't touched on yet.
Oh boy. I think I know where you were going with this. The sci-fi angle.
You know it. There was a brief, almost throwaway mention of the Neuralink implant.
The merger of man and machine.
Yeah.
The brain-computer interface.
Right. So we've spent this whole deep dive talking about how technology, from steamships to the internet to TikTok, has driven the need for language learning. But what happens when technology solves language?
You mean when the chip in your brain just translates everything instantly, perfectly?
Yeah.
The universal translator from Star Trek becomes a reality.
Exactly. If I can hear you speak Spanish, but my brain hears it in flawless English in real time,
Wow.
what happens to learning? Does the need to learn a language just disappear entirely? Do we revert to a new version of the silent generation where no one learns because they don't need to?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it? If the utility of language is completely solved by AI, what is left? Why would anyone bother?
I think the answer might lie back in that Habla description, in the making friends part.
I think you're absolutely right. We might not need to learn Spanish to order a beer or close a business deal in the future. The AI will do that for us. But we might still choose to learn it.
Why?
To understand the soul of the person serving the beer. To understand the cultural context of the joke they just told. To get the nuance. To feel the poetry in a song, not just the literal meaning.
To actually make a friend.
Exactly. A chip can translate words. I'm not sure it can ever truly translate culture or humor or intimacy. And as long as we human beings crave that genuine connection, I think we will keep learning.
The human element keeps it alive no matter what the tech is.
Always.
I love that. And that is your homework for the week. Observe how you interact with language in your own life. Are you using it as a tool, like a screwdriver? Or are you using it as a bridge to another person? Just think about it. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Until next time.